We are deeply loved by God. You're deeply loved by God. You have a community of faith, a church, if you're part of Crossway Church or another Christ-centered church, that you might not feel like you're loved. You might wonder, if they knew, would they love me? I want you to know that if we peel back the layers, all of us have struggles. Church has to be a place where we can strip back the layers and we can see the pain, the wounds, the hurt, the struggles that all of us carry, and we walk with each other. So you're loved, you're not alone, and don't attempt to walk alone in any form of mental struggle, or just as a human being, as a Christian. You find healing and hope in community. And someday, in the new heaven, the new earth, for all those that know Jesus, we'll be whole and we'll be like him.
Well, welcome to the Extra 10. My name is Ben Cartland, joined here once again by Jason Esposito. Jason, how you doing today, man?
I'm feeling overweight. I am.
All right, well, me too.
I'm just feeling
like
I had this routine and there's just been stuff going on, and yes.
I was outside. The kids were playing outside yesterday, and I was outside, just doing a few things around the house. And I had to take off my sweatshirt and or jacket because it was warm.
Nice.
And that's when I really started feeling it. I was like, oh boy, I gotta be in a t-shirt for the foreseeable future here coming up. So I better get things together. So like goals and finish lines are important. Yes.
As human beings. And I know some like them more than others, but we all need them. I always think of the weekend as a finish line.
Okay. Yep.
For writing a sermon.
Right.
So actually I'm going to be on like a 11-week run now. I'm going to be preaching 10 of 11 weeks.
Wow.
So it's one of the longest runs I've been on in a while.
Yeah.
There were years, way back when I would do, 50 weekends a year and stuff, but that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
Man. That's for the young. That's even too much for the young.
Well, and four services now preaching that. I mean,
it's a lot.
50 sermons a year times 4, that's 200.
Yeah,
200
that's a lot. That's a lot. So that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be on a pretty long run to Easter, and then after Easter, actually.
Okay.
So Holy Week's coming.
Oh, very cool. So you were saying something about goals and
and my weight.
Like go back.
So we have a family wedding coming up the end of May, and I'm using that as a target goal to get in my suit that I need to buy for the wedding. So it's slightly too small.
You bought it a size small?
I did.
Motivate yourself?
Oh man, that's a bad idea. I have a feeling this is gonna make a sermon someday.
Yeah, well,
I did. It's a little bit small, so I'm like, I'm cutting weight for this.
Well, recently I got a couple T-shirts in a size bigger.
You did.
I had been like forcing myself to no, Ben, you wear this size, you wear this size, and but they're so much more comfortable.
Yeah, I know they are. So
giving in,
size too small.
Okay,
so I have
that's your motivation.
And which is kind of my goal weight, target weight, ideal weight, depending on what you read.
Yeah. Well, good for you, man.
Well, no, I haven't done it yet. There's no good. I've been going the opposite direction.
At least you're trying.
So we'll see. Well, we'll see. Either that or I'm going to have to get like the button or something moved out or whatever that is. However,
get it tailored up.
Yeah, I'm going to get tailored. So,
well, I'm starting my diet and exercise tomorrow.
Okay.
As always, the perpetual tomorrow.
Right.
So
your nose is growing.
I'll join you.
Pinocchio reference.
I have a long nose.
No, Pinocchio. It's a Pinocchio reference.
Yeah, whatever.
Should we talk about mental illness?
We should talk about mental illness. So we continue in our series. Can Christians blank? We've covered a lot of hot button topics. We got another one coming up next week.
We land on doubt. I was working on it this morning.
Okay.
I'm pretty excited, actually.
Yeah, like can Christians doubt, which I think is going to be a great conversation next week on the podcast, but very much looking forward to the sermon. Can
I say something about that?
Absolutely.
Because some people would be like, especially at Crossway, because we've talked about doubt, Community for the Curious, are like, oh, yeah, duh, of course Christians can doubt. Some people are like that. Some people aren't like, oh, I don't know if I can doubt. And we'll talk about that. But I just want to encourage everybody, as I'm looking at, there's 3 core biblical stories that we're going to look at and unpack, and I'm super excited about them. And as I started to dig a little bit deeper into this idea of doubt, I'm discovering it actually is a tool to go under the waterline in our life. It tags a little bit into what we talked about this past weekend.
Okay.
And so I'm really excited, and I just want to encourage people not to check out.
Yeah.
Because it's not as,
not as cut and dry as maybe we might think it is.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a word right now.
Okay.
Like as controversial as, is saucy, is that a thing?
Yeah, I mean,
if something's saucy,
technically,
is that appropriate?
I think so.
Okay, saucy.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
All right, we can check later.
Saucy. That's a little bit of attitude. Something like that.
It's not as saucy as politics and transgender and mental illness and maybe gambling. You know, but it's really critical. In fact, I think it intersects with all the other ones. It wasn't originally going to be the last one. It was going to be the first one. But I'm glad it's the last one.
You did not preach this weekend.
Nope.
Some other members,
Dan, Tony, and Logan.
Yeah, other members of the teaching team preached this weekend. So I guess give you the opportunity to answer the question, though it was answered in the sermons.
Right.
But for you to speak into it is can Christians frankly suffer from mental illness, or is it a spiritual problem, or is it some other thing?
Yes.
All right, so moving on.
So, yes.
Do you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, and Dan pointed it out well, and I know Tony and Logan also unpacked different aspects of mental illness as well. It really goes back to, and this is part of the barrier why it is still in some circles covered in shame. And I know Dan talked a little bit about that. And shame hides, and that's what we see way back in Genesis. Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and what did they do? They ran, they hid, they covered themselves. That's all like the origins of shame. And I think one of the reasons why there's often so much shame around it, or in some circles like, oh, it doesn't exist, or you can't talk about it, is because we have a more Western idea of the Bible than a Middle Eastern. And remember, the Bible was written in a Middle Eastern culture.
Right.
And so we like to compartmentalize everything. We say, this is a spiritual problem. This is demonic influence. This is a physical problem. This is a mental problem. This is an emotional problem. We put everything in buckets.
Right.
And I get that. I do that too. And that's kind of how the human brain is in part, so that we can function. Like I'm dealing with my taxes right now. That's on my brain right now.
Hooray.
Taxes, that's a different podcast. and we do that. But really, when you read the Bible, we're a whole. And Dan alluded to this. I also alluded to this 2 weeks ago. The idea that we are a soul, we are a body. It's all integrated. So you can't separate our mind and our brains from our physical embodied existence, which obviously the brain is physical, but you can't separate spiritual warfare. It's all integrated. And the more we see it as integrated, I think we have a more holistic approach. And so, mental illness diagnosed, and Dan used the statistic is 25%. It's actually 25% of people, and Dan highlighted this, that are clinically diagnosed with a mental illness. But there's many more people that just struggle with depression, or struggle with obsessive thoughts, or struggle with some anxiety. So 25% is like the clinical diagnosis. Like you have OCD, you have, we like our letters. Right. You have certain disorders. And then, but greater than that is struggling with some level of, mental challenge. But really, a mental challenge is a physical challenge. It's a spiritual challenge. It's holistic. So we just take a holistic approach to it. We recognize how important it is to. He told that story from When You Don't Desire God by Pastor Piper. Where he realized, I think it was his thyroid was not producing what it should, and sometimes it is that there are chemical imbalances in our bodies. We know that to be true. And if we believe in depravity, if we believe in the fall, if we believe that sin messed everything up. I had a friend years ago, I was really struggling with, should Christians ever take medication for diagnosed mental illness? And, I was at a season where I'm like, should we not? Can we just pray enough? Can we read the Bible enough, memorize community, all the spiritual disciplines? And my friend challenged me. He's a godly Christian. And he said, you don't really believe your theology. What are you talking about? He says, well, you say you believe in total depravity, which is the idea that when Adam and Eve sinned, it messed everything up. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, do you have, and again, it was alluded to in the sermon. Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have on and on and on, all the different things? Is there cancer? And why couldn't there be, chemicals that are not as God originally intended that are causing you to have what is diagnosed as mental illness? And there might at times, you might at times need certain medicines to help kind of balance those out. And that's not the end all. And I think that's part of the challenge, because I know really it's actually, I would say, counseling is still in some circles a taboo, but not as much in the church circles that I traffic in.
Right.
Medication is really the one that I think is a little bit more debated, and then what kind of counseling? I know there's books about like bad counseling and there is bad counseling. Right. And again, that was, I'm just reiterating everything that was in the sermon.
So I guess one of the questions I had, because if there's 25% of the population that is diagnosed, with a mental illness, probably a lot more that haven't, right. And I don't have a stat in front of me for that. Why is it still so taboo? Why is it still so stigmatized? Like, what about, admitting or acknowledging or treating, frankly, or seeking treatment for a mental illness? Why is that still kind of looked at as, weakness, or again, like even the idea of, because you're right, like, do you have high blood pressure? Yes. You take medicine for your high blood pressure? Yes. Then what's the difference? And though I agree with it, when you put those things in front of you, it would be easier for me to take medicine for high blood pressure than it would for me to take medicine for a mental illness. Just again, because there's a stigma attached to it. And I'm just curious if you have any insights as to why.
Well, I think you said it, because to admit that you have mental illness is to admit that you're weak. And we don't want to admit that we're weak. We don't want to admit that we have a problem, that we have something that needs to be addressed. And that's part of pride. It's part of just the challenge of being human. So I think that's a big part of it. Like if I say I have OCD, or which I do, then all of a sudden, like, I'm not mature, and especially in Christian circles, like I don't have enough faith, or I'm not mature, or I don't believe that God can heal, and I am reasonably mature, depending on which day you're talking about, and I have lots of faith, and sometimes I don't, and and all of those things. So I do think that we have kind of tagged Christian maturity, and so I'm talking more in Christendom, with lack of struggle. But when you look at the early disciples, when you look at the church and the history of the church and some of the quote unquote greats of the church, like, in fact, they struggled deeply. And in the sermon, again, some were mentioned, like Martin Luther, like Spurgeon. Spurgeon was a great preacher, one of the early kind of mega church pastors, and he struggled significantly with depression. Like, he really had deep depression. And so I think we have this idea that if we love Jesus, if we're on purpose for God, if we have robust faith, then we're not going to struggle. But actually, when you look at church history in the Bible, the opposite is true. Right. The people that often struggle the most are people that love Jesus the most. And because we're in a broken world, because to live for Christ is countercultural, sometimes counterintuitive, because there are spiritual forces of darkness. We did a series on that already, where demonic forces are real, and because we're just broken, we're sinful, where our brain chemistry is not what God originally intended it to be. And so we struggle. But I think, again, there's this thin, unhealthy theology that says, the more I mature in Christ, the less I struggle. But that's not true. I find, like, the more that I mature in Christ, the more, like, minute my struggles become. In that, they become, like, where before maybe my struggle was, I'm not going to get drunk every weekend or whatever. Right, I'm just saying that, I don't get drunk. But, or someone's like, I'm not going to curse like a sailor. Right. Or I'm not going to, whatever, I'm not going to be a rageaholic anymore. I'm not going to, the kind of the external things. But then as you grow, you're like, well, I'm not getting drunk anymore, and I'm not cursing like a sailor. And I don't know if sailors still curse like that. But, that's like the statement. Or I'm not going to have road rage anymore, and you're like, wow, great. But then it's pride, it's obsessive thoughts, it's a Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks about, if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. So you're like, oh, I don't look at porn anymore, I don't look at all those things, I'm not being unfaithful or whatever it is, and you've cleaned up in Christ all those areas of your life. But as you mature, you're like, oh, but do you still lust in your heart, in your mind? And so I do think that there's this misunderstanding of maturity and faith that equals less struggles. And I would say it just kind of narrows the struggles. And then we find joy and freedom, and we find healing in those struggles as we mature.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating conversation because you're right. I think it's oftentimes, I think it's dangerous because the expectation that we have is that the more I mature in Christ, the less struggles I'm going to have. So if I think back to when I first crossed the line of faith, and you're right, some of the big things that I needed to deal with, the obvious things, I guess is a better way to put it, that I needed to deal with, and you kind of imagine that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that once I get through these few, then I theoretically should be without struggle. Yeah. But you're right, the struggles they change form a little bit,
right,
or a lot of bit in my case. But that is interesting because I think it's almost a little bit dangerous. And how do we kind of combat that expectation a little bit? I'm just a little bit more curious on this. I know it's not direct mental illness, but I think it's important to talk about these expectations of, as we grow in our faith, like what we can expect, because I would have to think that a lot of people that are coming to Christ do have that same expectation that I had, that eventually life's going to be easy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. So I like to say it this way, that following Christ is the right way, but not the easy way. And I see the other side. Let me just say this, because every time I say something, I'm like, right. You know? And, if we follow Christ, and in following Christ, and we're new creatures in Christ, we're following the 10 Commandments, more than not, like, we're going to experience less pain in a lot of different areas. But I think what happens is we think it's going to be the absence of pain. And what happens as we grow in Christ is that if we don't have pain, we regress, we become prideful. If we don't have pain, we begin thinking, look what I've done. And I know, like, when's your greatest prayer times? When are you often really crying out to God? When are you, knocking on the door of a godly Christian friend and saying, hey, we need to talk? Well, usually, if your experience is my experience, is the common experience among Christians, it's going to be when things are hard, when things are difficult. So it causes us to be dependent on God. But it's not that it's not wonderful and beautiful. I mean, I don't want this idea, I don't want to follow Christ because then life is going to be hard. Well, life is just hard for everyone. And I can't imagine, losing a loved one apart from a relationship with Christ. I can't imagine how hard that is, or going through a season of difficulty and, believing that there's no God, believing that there's no purpose. There's no, like, it's just like life. And instead of actually leaning into the belief that there is a God who's present with you in your pain. And so following Christ isn't the absence of pain, but it's finding joy and presence in the pain, which then leads to greater maturity and is the best way to live. And I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to, younger Jason that wasn't living for Jesus. And, I had a perception of life that it was easy and that it was light and there was no concerns, but it was very selfish too.
Yeah. And part of that journey, that I've been on, when you find, like you were kind of saying, the narrower struggles in your life, is, kind of exploring the why behind those, and whether it's counseling that I know you and I both engage in, or just great mentor relationships, or challenging community where it's kind of that iron sharpening iron type concept, where you're really being pushed and stretched to grow, is really identifying kind of the why behind some of those things. Like there's like these very real victories that you can get to every once in a while. Like, oh wow, that's why I've been kind of a little bit short with my temper when it comes to that specific topic with my wife or my kids or my coworkers or things. And it's those little victories, and at least for me personally, finding that, like, getting to the root of it and kind of like rooting out. And even though there's struggles that are always going to be there, there's still victory in those things as well, as much as the big things like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I'm experiencing greater victory. There's areas that I used to struggle with that I don't struggle with anymore. But then there's areas that are still with me, and they've taken on a different shape and form. But I'm finding, and Paul writes about this, the Apostle Paul, I'm finding Christ's strength, and I'm actually finding a sense of joy in the struggles, which is not always in every struggle, but in a lot of them. Like, okay, all right, I see what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so I think that's critical. Back to this idea of bad therapy, of counseling is toxic.
Right.
We should never, ever use medication. Like all of these conversations. I think what's important for us to understand is that there is, bad fill in the blank and everything. There's bad pastors.
Right.
There's toxic churches. There's bad companies and CEOs and managers and politicians and, in every area of life.
Yep.
And it's sometimes when someone goes to a professional licensed Christian counselor, and we have our partnership with New Life and some other organizations, they expect that to be the button. Like if I just go to this counselor, I'm paying a lot of money.
Right.
And it's in a lot of ways, it's like going to our regular medical doctor, for your physical or whatever, your annual checkup, and you're like, just take this medicine. And I'm not anti-medicine. I think medicine is necessary and helpful at times, but sometimes it's like, well, maybe I should just stop eating Kentucky Fried Chicken every day. Right? I mean, sometimes it's like, do I want to make the choices that I need to make, lifestyle choices? And then sometimes you cut all that out and you still need to take the medicine, right? Because there's genetic disposition, all these kind of things. Right. The point is that we go to a counselor and we think that's the end. I'm going to push that button and then I'm going to be fine. I'm not going to struggle with whatever it is, depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD, bipolar, whatever the struggle is. And that's just not how it works. A counselor is just part of the puzzle. So if we begin to think about wholeness and maturity as a puzzle, like one piece of the puzzle for a season or sometimes for multiple seasons, is a licensed Christian counselor. Maybe for a season, it's medication. Maybe medication is part of your story for the remainder of your life where you need appropriate medication. Because why? Because of total depravity, because sin permanently messed up brain chemistry. And that's guided by counselors and medical professionals and psychiatrists and everybody speaking into that. Then we need community and we need the classic spiritual disciplines. And we need all of these type of things. And if we would just look at our lives more like a puzzle, like 100-piece puzzle. I'm not really good at puzzles, so I didn't want to say 1,000-piece puzzle. Like 100-piece puzzle, like the bigger pieces. And we need to continually make sure we're engaging different aspects of the puzzle. We will grow as followers of Christ. We will mature, but not just seeing it as like a one-off. Like if I just take medication or if I just see a counselor or if I just go on this, retreat or if I just get the right sermon or if I just, that's what we're doing if I just read this Bible verse, if I just, pray 1 minute longer, it's not like that. It's a puzzle. It's complex, it's layered, and we engage holistically our mental, physical, spiritual health. And again, we are a soul and we are a body. We're whole. And so we need to engage it in a holistic manner.
And so that kind of leads me to, kind of the next question. We talked about that exactly what you're saying, that there's not one button to solve any one problem. And we also talked about how mental illness could be a chemical imbalance that needs drugs for, or, it's a real challenge, a real disease, however you want to look at it, that needs treatment. But what role does, and you also mentioned at the beginning that it's kind of all together, like we're a physical body, a spiritual body, an emotional body, all of those things. So how do we engage in a healthy way if we are struggling with a mental illness or even thinking we might be, or just struggling in general, engage kind of maybe the physical side as far as like doctor or medication or things like that, but also not ignore the spiritual side, that it's not like like you said, not one single button that we push, that it is kind of holistic. And then the physical side, like, are you taking care of your body? Are you taking care of yourself spiritually? And then, yes, are you taking care of yourself mentally? How do we engage that kind of holistic approach to any problem, but in this specific context, mental illness?
Yeah. It begins with saying, I need help. Like we all need help, whether you have a clinical diagnosis or not. Whether you're like, this is definitely a chemical imbalance or not, or it's childhood trauma, or it's this, or whatever. It's just like, I need help. And really that's the starting point it's a starting point for Christianity. I'm dead. I'm dead to Christ. While I was still a sinner, while I was still an enemy of God, God made the first move. He sent his son, Jesus Christ. So I need help. Actually, what I did, I was going to do this in our staff chapel today. So you're going to hear it twice. I just was ready. I listened to the message and I was thinking about I was thinking about just things that I've done. And so I don't do all of these all the time.
Right.
But over the years of engaging holistic health, mental health, spiritual health, but talk about mental health. What are some things that I've leaned into that have helped move the needle for my holistic maturity and growth? And so I listed 45.
Great.
I'll just go fast.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
So and these are just in random order.
Yeah.
Discover your sacred pathway and lean into it. So that's there was a book by Gary Thomas.
Okay.
And again, I won't talk about every one of these. Otherwise we'll be here a long time.
Real long time.
This is the idea that God has wired us uniquely and really think about how do you nurture your walk with God. For some people, it's out in nature. For some people, it's formal, deep study. Like they want to, break apart the Greek.
Yeah.
For some people, it's going to a food kitchen and a soup kitchen and serving, those kind of things. And again, we engage all of them, but there's certain primary ways that I think God has wired us. So when you figure that out, like nurture your walk with God through that, what Gary calls the sacred pathway. Number 2, see a Christian counselor for a season, even if you think you don't need it. So I just think it's just helpful. Yeah. And so it's all different. Like there's times I've seen a Christian counselor for like 6 sessions just to deal with a particular struggle. And then I didn't see a counselor for years. And then there's times that I went, once a month. And now I'm going every 7 weeks, and then I'll probably move to court. Like it's all different, and for some people it's, once a month for their whole life. Right. Or for some people you're going once a week for like a long season, those things. But see a professional Christian licensed counselor. Number 3, know when to take a time out. I'll just keep going. Yeah. Number 4, find someone who does what you do and develop a text phone friendship with them. So, often our stress or anxiety is wrapped around being a stay-at-home parent or being a pastor, being an executive director of operations, being a bodybuilder, being, I don't know, I was just thinking about someone in the room, but those kind of things,
Not me,
well, I was thinking about you. Yeah.
Right.
Whatever, like find someone who's like in your vocation, kind of in your environment that you have a really good rate, because they're going to probably experience similar challenges and stuff like that. Find someone who's at least 7 to 10 years older than you and periodically grab lunch or coffee, just like someone who's older than you. So, hey, you got that, Ben. Number 7, remember what the past struggles felt like and how they had passed and applied to today. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
So especially with my struggle with OCD, I have obsessive thoughts. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm thinking this, and then I go back a few years. Oh, I remember when I thought like this in this situation, and that passed. Yeah. This too will pass. Remember, you can hold 2 things together: joy and sadness, peace and anxiousness, fun and boredom. Like, I think everything is actually always 2 things together. Right. I don't think I'm always like fully happy or fully joyful. I think it's always mingled together this side of eternity. Right. Number 8, read, watch, listen to stories from dead people or old people that have struggled. So I watch documentaries, read books, podcasts, I've read books on Billy Graham, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Eugene Peterson, Dallas Willard, like just love all of those. Yeah. But even non-Christians, like I watch a special on Billy Joel's life, and it was like it actually was kind of helpful. Yeah. Number 9, know what drains you and what energizes you. 10, go to an annual physical. So, just go to a physical, go to an annual physical, get blood work done. Exercise, movement. It doesn't need to be like, you're going to train for Ninja Warrior or something like that. Is that still a thing? I think it is, right? It's kind of, Ninja Warrior, right? Just like
no risk of that for me.
Yeah. Just like some kind of movement. Go to bed and wake up around the same time as much as possible. So rhythm. Drink a lot of water. Hey. Yeah. Spend a little money on something fun. So a little money. And then I said / start paying off debt. Yes. So that's the other side of that. If you have debt, serve others. So something that happens when we serve others, we take our focus off self. Yep. Spend time with someone close to the end of their life. It's so powerful. To Ecclesiastes talks about that. Better to go to a house of mourning than a house of celebration. Reread Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Psalms. The older I get, the more I want to read those 3 books. When I was younger, I was like, especially Psalms. No, I want to read Romans, and Romans is awesome, but reread those. Give yourself the grace God gives you. Find a trained spiritual director. Pray, read a book on prayer, and pray more. Reduce time on your phone, social media, and reading the news. Listen to a podcast, worship music, classical music, sounds of nature, things that are filling, encouraging. Journal, write an article or book, go on a global trip or camp or retreat, spend time with the people that will be in your life in 20 years. So, did you catch that one? Yeah, like spend time with the people who are going to be in your life a couple decades from now.
Yeah.
Memorize key biblical passages, deep study on a book or chapter or verse in the Bible. Read a really good Christian book or listen to a book on Audible or what your audio book of choice, audio platform of choice. Lament to God and friends, obsess over eternity, take guided medication if needed, practice biblical meditation and breathing. Holy Noticing is a great book on that. Do something really hard, start something new, a one-off, a regular, like new hobby, new thing. It could be one time. Take a nap, stand in the sun, take vitamin D, get a sun lamp. Change your diet, practice weekly Sabbath, attend worship service, go back to school or attend a seminar. Remember you're human and depraved. Invest in deep biblical friendship. Live in the now. Follow the 10 Commandments. And be quick to listen and slow to speak. So those are just 45 things that I've engaged periodically. 45, to just help with your mental illness and your overall spiritual growth. But we are a spirit, we are a body.
And I feel like there's aspects of each of those that could be their own podcast. But definitely. I think just taking really just a couple of things off of that list. And like you said, those aren't things that you do every single day.
All 45 every day. No, like
you've done over
decades
to help address those
Some
things.
I lean more into at different times. Right.
And what I find oftentimes, because to me, there wasn't any like shocking revelations in that list. Right. All very important things, but there was one or two that like stuck out to me. And I was like, oh, you know what? I haven't engaged that in a while.
Yeah.
Exercise being one of them, calling back to our earlier conversation, but I'm willing to bet that for everybody listening, that there was one or two that really stuck out to them, that just kind of like, oh yeah, I haven't done that in a while, and that might help. And I think pay attention to that, like when you read, and we went through it fast, weren't able to go into a lot of detail on a lot of those things. But for the couple that stuck out to anyone, like dig into those, reach into those, rewind it, listen to it again if you didn't catch any or catch a couple of them. Because there's certainly something on that list that everybody could and probably should be applying to their life right now. Yeah. And so as we wrap up here, talking about mental illness and kind of that whole conversation, is there anything, again, not having preached this weekend, is there anything that you want to make sure that we touch on that we weren't able to yet?
Yeah. We are deeply loved by God. You're deeply loved by God. You have a community of faith at church, if you're part of Crosswick Church or another Christ-centered church, that you might not feel like you're loved. You might wonder, like, if they knew, would they love me? I want you to know that if we peel back the layers, all of us have struggles. Whether they are, part of the 25% or not, all of us have struggles. And church has to be a place where we can strip back the layers and we can see the pain, the wounds, the hurt, the struggles that all of us carry, and we walk with each other. So you're loved, you're not alone, and don't attempt to walk alone in any form of mental struggle, or just as a human being, as a Christian. We walk in community. We find healing and hope in community. And someday, in the new heaven, the new earth, for all those that know Jesus, we'll be whole and we'll be like him.
Well, this is The Extra 10. My name is Ben Cartland, here with Jason Esposito. Jason, thanks for stopping by today, man.
Have a good day, man.